The sun blazed ruthlessly over the parched New Mexico territory, as Vivian Grayson's wrists bled against the coarse metal shackles binding her to the wagon wheel. 3 days she had been left there, abandoned to the merciless elements by the notorious Blackwater Gang, who had ambushed her traveling party near Santa Fe in the summer of 1873. Dust coated her once fine blue dress, now torn and soiled beyond recognition. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, her auburn hair matted with sweat and dirt. She had long since stopped crying out for help, conserving what little moisture remained in her body. The gang had taken everything her family's money, the horses, supplies, and left her to die after killing the driver and her elderly uncle, who had been escorting her west to meet her arranged fiance. When the distant sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, Vivian believed it to be a hallucination born of desperation. Her head hung limply against her chest, lacking the strength to look up even as the sound grew louder. The approaching rider slowed, and she heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. "Good Lord above," a deep voice murmured. Rough, calloused fingers gently tilted her chin upward. Through swollen eyelids, Vivian glimpsed a face partially obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, concerned blue eyes studying her with a mixture of shock and determination. "Miss, can you hear me?" The man knelt before her, producing a canteen. "Easy now, just a sip at first." Cool water touched her parched lips, and Vivian gasped, choking slightly as her body remembered how to swallow. "There you go," he encouraged, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his rugged appearance. "My name's Samuel Irwin. I'm going to get you out of here." She managed to nod weakly as Samuel rose and moved behind the wagon wheel. Through her delirium, she heard the distinctive sound of a blade being drawn. "Hold still. I'll have you free in a moment." The tension on her wrists suddenly released as he cut through the ropes binding her to the iron wheel. Without their support, Vivian slumped forward, but strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," Samuel assured, gathering her carefully against his chest. "You're safe now." The smell of leather, horse, and sun-warmed cotton enveloped her as he carried her to his horse. Vivian caught glimpses of a weathered face, perhaps 30 years of age, with several days' worth of stubble, and those startlingly blue eyes that conveyed both hardness and compassion. "Need to get you to town," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You need a doctor. They'll come back," Vivian managed to whisper, her voice a painful rasp. Samuel's expression darkened. "The Blackwater boys, they're long gone, headed south toward Texas last I heard." He carefully positioned her in the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm securing her against his chest. "Don't you worry about them now. First thing is getting you fixed up." As the horse began to move, the gentle rocking motion and the security of being held upright lulled Vivian toward unconsciousness. The last thing she remembered was Samuel's voice, low and reassuring near her ear. "Stay with me, miss. Just a few more miles to Cottonwood Springs." When Vivian awoke, the harsh sunlight had been replaced by the muted glow of oil lamps. She lay on a bed with clean sheets, her body washed and dressed in a simple cotton nightgown. The room was small but tidy, with simple furnishings suggesting a boarding house or modest hotel. Attempting to sit up, she gasped at the pain that shot through her wrists, now carefully bandaged. The sound alerted someone in the corner of the room, a woman in her 50s with graying hair tied back in a severe bun. "Easy now, child," the woman said, approaching the bed. "You've been through quite an ordeal. I'm Martha Wells, the doctor's wife. He patched you up last night when Mr. Irwin brought you in." "How long have I been here?" Vivian asked, her voice still rough but stronger than before. "Almost a full day and night," Martha replied, pouring water from a pitcher. "You were severely dehydrated." Here, drink this." As Vivian sipped the water gratefully, the door opened, and Samuel Irwin entered, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. He appeared less intimidating in the gentle lamplight, tall and lean rather than bulky, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face showed relief when he saw her awake. "Miss Grayson," he said with a nod. "Good to see some color back in your cheeks." Vivian stared at him in confusion. "How do you know my name?" "Your papers were still in your uncle's coat pocket," Samuel explained. "I'm sorry about what happened to him and your driver." The memory of her uncle's murder flooded back, and Vivian closed her eyes against the sudden rush of grief. "I found their bodies about a quarter-mile from where you were," Samuel continued gently. "I buried them proper before coming back for you, said some words over them too." "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "They were good men." "My uncle was taking me to Silver City to meet my fiance." Samuel nodded. "Mr. Lawrence Prentice, according to the letters. I took the liberty of sending a telegram informing him of what happened and that you're safe in Cottonwood Springs." Vivian felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. The arrangement with Lawrence had been purely practical, a business agreement between her father and Lawrence's mining company. They had never even met. "The sheriff wants to speak with you when you're able," Samuel added. "See if you can identify any of the gang members." "Of course," Vivian agreed, adjusting her position against the pillows. "Mr. Irwin, I don't know how to thank you for saving my life." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Sam will do, miss, and no thanks needed. Any decent man would have done the same." Martha cleared her throat. "That's enough excitement for now. Miss Grayson needs her rest." Samuel nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll check in tomorrow. Rest well, Miss Grayson." After he left, Martha helped Vivian eat some broth and bread before dimming the lamps. Alone in the semi-darkness, Vivian found herself thinking about the cowboy who had cut her bonds and pulled her to safety. There was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding that suggested he knew exactly what it meant to be at the mercy of cruel men. For the first time since the attack, Vivian felt truly safe. The next morning brought Sheriff Collins, a barrel-chested man with a drooping mustache and kind eyes that belied his intimidating physique. He sat beside Vivian's bed with notebook in hand as she recounted every detail she could remember about the Blackwater Gang. "There were 5 of them," she explained, her fingers nervously twisting the bedsheet. "The leader was tall with a scar that ran from his eye to his jaw. They called him Cord. The others I didn't catch names for, except one they called Rattler, who had a missing front tooth." The sheriff nodded, making notes. "That matches what we know of Cordell Blackwater and his crew. They've been terrorizing folks from here to Arizona territory. Been trying to catch up to them for months. They took everything," Vivian continued. "Our horses, supplies, money. They killed Uncle Henry and Mr. Johnson when they tried to protect me. Then they—" Her voice faltered. "You don't need to relive it all at once, Miss Grayson," Sheriff Collins said kindly. "You've told me enough to confirm it was them." A knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel entered carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Pardon the intrusion," he said. "Mrs. Wells at the general store put together some essentials for Miss Grayson. Thought you might need these." Vivian accepted the package with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Sam." Sheriff Collins rose, tucking his notebook into his vest pocket. "I'll be heading out with a posse tomorrow to track the Blackwater Gang. They've left too many victims in their wake." After the sheriff departed, Samuel lingered awkwardly by the door. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Vivian replied. "The doctor says I can be up and about tomorrow if I continue to improve." Samuel nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I received a reply to the telegram. Your fiance says he'll send a stagecoach escort for you next week when you're stronger." "Oh," Vivian felt a strange disappointment at the news. That's thoughtful of him. He also sent money for your care and lodging, Samuel added, pulling an envelope from his pocket and placing it on the bedside table. Said to spare no expense. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Mr. Irwin. Sam, Vivian began hesitantly. May I ask what you do? Are you from Cottonwood Springs? Samuel shook his head. Just passing through. I run cattle mostly, have a small spread about 20 miles north of here. Was on my way back from delivering a herd to Santa Fe when I found you. Then you're a long way from home because of me, Vivian observed. A slight smile crossed his face. Not the first time I've been delayed by unexpected circumstances, though finding a lady chained to a wagon wheel is certainly a first. Despite everything, Vivian found herself smiling back. There was something about Samuel Irwin that put her at ease, a straightforward honesty that contrasted sharply with the formal politeness she'd grown accustomed to in St. Louis society. Well, I should let you rest, he said, reaching for the door handle. Will you come back tomorrow? The question escaped before Vivian could consider its propriety. Samuel paused, surprise evident in his expression. If you'd like. I would, she confirmed. I'd like to hear more about your ranch. It would be a pleasant distraction. He tipped his hat. Until tomorrow then, Miss Grayson. True to his word, Samuel returned the following afternoon, finding Vivian dressed in a simple calico dress provided by the doctor's wife, sitting in a chair by the window. Her auburn hair was neatly braided, and though her face still showed signs of her ordeal, her green eyes were bright and alert. You look much improved, Samuel observed, setting his hat on a nearby table. I feel almost human again, Vivian replied with a small smile. Dr. Wells says I'm recovering remarkably well. Samuel took the chair opposite her. That's good news. Tell me about your ranch, Vivian prompted, eager to hear about a life so different from her own. For the next hour, Samuel described his modest cattle operation, the challenges of drought and harsh winters, the satisfaction of a successful drive, the beauty of the high desert landscape. Vivian listened, captivated by his unpretentious passion for the land. It's not much compared to the big outfits, he admitted. Just 100 head of cattle, a small cabin, and more work than one man can rightly handle, but it's mine, free and clear. It sounds wonderful, Vivian said sincerely. So different from St. Louis. What was your life like there? Samuel asked. Vivian sighed. Confined. My father was a banker. After my mother died 5 years ago, he became protective to the point of suffocation. I rarely left the house except for church or chaperoned social events. She paused, memories flooding back. When he arranged my marriage to Lawrence Prentice, I thought at least I would see something of the world beyond our neighborhood. And now you have, Samuel observed quietly. Though not in the way you expected. No, she agreed, absently touching the bandages on her wrists. Not at all as I expected. Over the next few days, Samuel became a regular visitor. He helped Vivian take short walks around town as her strength returned, introducing her to the townspeople who greeted her with kindness and curiosity. She learned that Samuel was respected in the area not only as a capable rancher, but as a man known for his integrity. You seem to know everyone, Vivian remarked as they strolled slowly down the main street on the 5th day of her recovery. I come into town every few months for supplies, he explained. Cottonwood Springs isn't big enough to hold secrets. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Including yours, she asked with a teasing smile. A shadow crossed his face. What there is of it. Sensing his discomfort, Vivian changed the subject. The stagecoach arrives tomorrow. I suppose I should be prepared to leave. Samuel nodded, his expression unreadable. I suppose so. That evening, as Vivian packed the few belongings she had acquired during her stay, Martha Wells brought up a supper tray and sat with her while she ate. "That Samuel Irwin has taken quite a shine to you," Martha observed, pouring tea. Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's been very kind." "Kind isn't the word I'd use," Martha said thoughtfully. "That man has kept to himself since he came to these parts 3 years ago. Never seen him spend so much time in town before." "He mentioned he has a ranch to run," Vivian replied, avoiding Martha's knowing gaze. "Indeed he does, and he's normally not one to neglect it." Martha stirred sugar into her tea. "You know, he was a cavalry officer during the war, came west afterward like many did." Vivian looked up in surprise. "He never mentioned that. He wouldn't. Sam doesn't talk about his past much." Martha set down her teacup. "But the night he brought you in when we weren't sure you'd make it, I saw something in that man I hadn't seen before, a kind of desperate prayer in his eyes." Later that night, unable to sleep, Vivian stood at her window gazing at the stars scattered across the vast western sky. Tomorrow she would board the stagecoach to Silver City to meet a man she had never seen who would become her husband. It was the future her father had arranged, the future she had accepted. Yet now, that future felt like another kind of chain binding her to a wheel of obligation and duty. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found Samuel standing in the dimly lit hallway, hat in hand. "I apologize for the late hour," he said quietly, "but I wanted to give you this before you left." He held out a small leather pouch. Inside, Vivian found a delicately carved wooden pendant on a simple cord, a flower that resembled a desert rose. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the smooth surface. "I made it while watching over you that first night," Samuel explained, looking uncomfortable with the admission. "Something to remember your time here by." Vivian impulsively reached out to touch his hand. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of possibilities that circumstances would not allow them to explore. "Will you see me off tomorrow?" Vivian asked. Samuel hesitated before nodding. "If that's what you wish." "It is." The stagecoach arrived promptly at noon the following day. The driver delivered a letter from Lawrence Prentice expressing concern for Vivian's welfare and assurances that she would be well cared for upon her arrival in Silver City. As her trunk was loaded onto the coach, Vivian sought out Samuel, who stood apart from the small gathering of townspeople who had come to bid her farewell. "This isn't much of a goodbye," she said, approaching him. "Never been good at goodbyes," he admitted, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Your fiance sounds like a decent man. I hope he'll make you happy." "Samuel." Vivian waited until he looked at her. "I want to thank you properly for saving my life." "You already have." She shook her head. "No, what I want to say is that you didn't just cut my bonds from that wagon wheel. You showed me a different kind of freedom, a glimpse of a life I never knew existed." Samuel's expression softened. "Miss Grayson, Vivian," she corrected. "After everything, I think you can call me Vivian." A small smile touched his lips. "Vivian, then." The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Vivian hesitated, then impulsively reached up to touch Samuel's cheek. "Goodbye, Sam." Before he could respond, she turned and walked quickly to the stagecoach, not trusting herself to look back. The journey to Silver City took 2 days, during which Vivian had ample time to reflect on the strange turn her life had taken. The attack had been horrific, the loss of her uncle devastating. Yet in the aftermath, she had experienced a curious kind of liberation, a chance to see the world without the filters her sheltered upbringing had imposed. And then there was Samuel Irwin, the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. And then, perhaps without intending to, shown her a version of herself she hadn't known existed, a woman capable of courage and resilience. Lawrence Prentice was waiting when the stagecoach arrived in Silver City. He proved to be exactly as described in his letters, a respectable businessman in his late 30s, well-dressed and well-spoken, with an air of confidence that spoke of his success. He expressed appropriate horror at her ordeal and insisted she be examined by the town doctor before escorting her to the hotel where he had arranged accommodations. "You must rest and recover fully," Lawrence told her over dinner that evening. "Our wedding can wait until you feel ready." "That's very considerate," Vivian replied, studying the man across from her. Lawrence was undoubtedly handsome in a conventional way, and his manners were impeccable. He spoke enthusiastically about his mining ventures and the house he was building on the edge of town. "It will be the finest residence in Silver City," he assured her, "suitable for entertaining business associates and their wives." Vivian nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, but found her thoughts drifting to a small cabin on a cattle ranch, and a man whose hands were calloused from honest work rather than smooth from counting money. In the days that followed, Lawrence proved to be an attentive if somewhat distant fiance. He sent flowers daily and took Vivian on carriage rides around Silver City, introducing her to the prominent citizens. He never pressed her about setting a wedding date, though he did suggest that autumn would be pleasant for a ceremony. 2 weeks after her arrival, Vivian was taking tea in the hotel dining room when Sheriff Collins from Cottonwood Springs entered, looking travel-worn and grim. He spotted her immediately and approached with his hat in his hands. "Miss Grayson," he greeted her with a respectful nod, "I hope you're recovering well." "I am, thank you," she replied, gesturing for him to join her. "What brings you to Silver City, Sheriff?" Collins sat heavily in the chair opposite her. "I'm tracking the Blackwater Gang. They hit a stagecoach north of here 3 days ago, 2 passengers killed." Vivian felt a chill run through her. "Have you been able to catch any of them?" "Not yet," Collins admitted, "but we're getting closer." "That's actually why I sought you out. There's something you should know." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "When I returned from the posse after you left Cottonwood Springs, I found that Sam Irwin had gone after them on his own. Word is he's been tracking them ever since." Vivian's teacup clattered against its saucer. "What? Why would he do such a thing?" Collins sighed. "Can't say for certain. Sam's always been a private sort, but I've known men like him before, men who have seen too much during the war, who carry a weight that never quite lifts. Sometimes they need to right a wrong to ease that burden." "But it's so dangerous," Vivian protested. "The Blackwater Gang is notorious." "Indeed they are," the sheriff agreed. "But Sam Irwin isn't exactly a novice when it comes to tracking or fighting. Still, I thought you should know, given how he looked after you." After Sheriff Collins departed, Vivian sat motionless, her tea growing cold. The thought of Samuel pursuing the dangerous outlaws who had nearly killed her filled her with dread. What if he was hurt or killed in his attempt to bring them to justice? When Lawrence called on her that evening, he found her distracted and pale. "Are you unwell, my dear?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Vivian hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I received troubling news today. The man who rescued me in the desert, Mr. Irwin, has apparently gone after the Blackwater Gang alone." Lawrence frowned. "That seems foolhardy. Surely that's a matter for the law." "Yes, but—" Vivian paused, struggling to articulate her feelings. "He saved my life, Lawrence. If something happens to him because of me—" "Because of you," Lawrence interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "My dear, this man's decision to pursue dangerous criminals is hardly your responsibility. It sounds as though he's chosen this course himself, for reasons of his own." Vivian knew Lawrence was being reasonable, and yet she couldn't shake the sense of connection she felt to Samuel's fate. That night, she slept poorly, haunted by dreams of Samuel facing the scarred leader of the Blackwater Gang alone in some desolate canyon. The following morning, she made a decision. After breakfast, she sought out Sheriff Collins at the Silver City Jail. "I want to know where Samuel is," she stated without preamble. Collins looked up from his desk in surprise. "Miss Grayson, I didn't tell you about Sam to cause you distress." "There's nothing you can do to help him." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but I can't simply continue with my life here knowing he may be in danger because of me." "It's not because of you," Collins said, echoing Lawrence's words. "Sam's a grown man making his own choices." "Please," Vivian pressed, "at least tell me where he was last seen." Collins studied her for a long moment before sighing in resignation. "Last report I had placed him near the Mogollon Mountains, following the gang's trail south. But that was 3 days ago." Vivian nodded, her mind racing. "Thank you, Sheriff." When she returned to the hotel, she found Lawrence waiting in the lobby, his expression concerned. "The hotel clerk said you went to the jail," he said, leading her to a quiet corner. "Vivian, what are you planning?" She looked into his face, the face of a man who had treated her with nothing but respect and consideration since her arrival. She owed him honesty. "Lawrence, I need to speak with you about our engagement." His expression grew guarded. "I see. You're a good man," Vivian continued. "Any woman would be fortunate to be your wife. But I—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "I believe it would be unfair to proceed with our marriage when my heart is not fully committed." Lawrence was silent for a long moment. "This is about the cowboy who rescued you." It wasn't a question, but Vivian nodded anyway. "Partly, yes, but it's also about me. These past weeks have shown me that I want something different from life than what I thought I wanted in St. Louis." To her surprise, Lawrence's expression held more understanding than anger. "I suspected as much. You've been different from the young woman described in your father's letters, more independent, more certain of yourself." "I'm sorry," Vivian said softly. Lawrence shook his head. "Don't be. Marriage should be entered willingly, not out of obligation." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small purse. "Take this. It should be enough to see you safely wherever you decide to go." Vivian stared at him in astonishment. "I can't accept that." "Consider it payment for your father's investment in my mining operation," Lawrence said firmly. "It's the least I can do." With unexpected gentleness, he took her hand and placed the purse in it. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Vivian." 2 days later, Vivian found herself on a stagecoach headed toward the small settlement of Pine Creek, the last place Sheriff Collins had heard reports of Samuel's whereabouts. She had exchanged her fine dresses for more practical attire, a split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a simple blouse, with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. The other passengers regarded her with curiosity. A young woman traveling alone was unusual enough to draw attention. Vivian kept to herself, her thoughts focused on what she would do when she reached Pine Creek. She had no real plan beyond finding information about Samuel's whereabouts. Pine Creek proved to be little more than a collection of buildings gathered around a crossroads, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of houses. The stagecoach dropped Vivian at the store, which also served as the post office and telegraph office. The proprietor, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up as she entered. "Afternoon, miss. Don't get many strangers passing through, especially not ladies on their own." "I'm looking for someone," Vivian explained. "A rancher named Samuel Irwin. I was told he might have passed through here recently." The storekeeper's eyebrows rose. "Sam Irwin? Yep, he was here about 4 days ago, bought supplies and asked questions about some riders who'd come through ahead of him." Vivian's heart quickened. Do you know which way he went? Headed west toward the mountains. The man studied her with increased interest. Mind if I ask what your business is with Sam? He's not the type to have young ladies chasing after him. He saved my life, Vivian replied simply, and now I fear he may be in danger because of it. Something in her expression must have convinced the storekeeper of her sincerity. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Listen, miss, those men Sam's tracking are bad business. The Blackwater Gang has killed at least a dozen people that I know of. I'm aware of who they are, Vivian said grimly. They left me to die in the desert after murdering my uncle and our driver. The storekeeper's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that, but if you're thinking of going after Sam, I strongly advise against it. That's rough country out there and with the gang about. I understand the risks, Vivian assured him. Is there someone in town who might guide me? I can pay. After some hesitation, the storekeeper directed her to a half-Apache scout named Joseph, who occasionally guided hunting parties into the mountains. Vivian found him at the edge of town, repairing a saddle outside a modest cabin. Joseph listened impassively as Vivian explained her situation. When she finished, he shook his head. The man you seek passed this way following the Blackwater Gang. I showed him their trail. But I will not take a woman alone into such danger. I understand your concern, Vivian acknowledged, but I'm determined to find him with or without a guide. Joseph studied her for a long moment. You care for this man. It wasn't a question, but Vivian answered anyway. Yes. And you would risk your life to warn him? I would. Joseph sighed heavily. Then you will likely die alone in the mountains, and that would dishonor both you and him. He rose to his feet. I will take you as far as the foothills. After that, we will see. They set out at dawn the following day, Vivian mounted on a sturdy mare purchased from the livery stable with Lawrence's money. Joseph led the way on his paint gelding, following a trail invisible to Vivian's untrained eyes. How do you know we're on the right path? She asked as they rode through a landscape of juniper and pinyon pine. The Blackwater Gang does not try to hide their trail, Joseph explained. 5 horses, one carrying extra weight, probably their stolen goods. Your friend Samuel is more careful. His horses' prints are lighter, set apart from theirs. He is staying back, watching. How far ahead are they? Joseph considered. The gang, perhaps 2 days. Your friend, less than 1 if we ride hard. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow. As they sat beside a small fire, Vivian asked the question that had been troubling her. Why would Samuel pursue them alone? He must know how dangerous they are. Joseph poked at the fire with a stick. Men have different reasons for seeking justice or revenge. Some do it for honor, some for peace. He glanced at Vivian. Has your friend spoken of his past? Very little, Vivian admitted. I know he was in the cavalry during the war. Joseph nodded. Many soldiers came west after the fighting ended, carrying shadows in their hearts. Some find a way to live with these shadows. Others need to confront them. Vivian thought of the brief glimpses she had caught of Samuel's deeper nature, the pain that sometimes shadowed his eyes, the way he seemed to understand suffering without needing it explained. You think he's confronting his own shadows by going after the Blackwater Gang? Perhaps, Joseph replied. Or perhaps he simply cannot allow men who would chain a woman to a wagon wheel to remain free. They rode hard the next day, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. By mid-afternoon, Joseph grew increasingly alert, studying the ground and surrounding landscape with heightened attention. The tracks are fresher, he informed Vivian. Your friend camped here last night. He pointed to the remnants of a small fire carefully concealed among rocks. So we might catch up to him today? Vivian asked, hope rising within her. Joseph nodded cautiously. "It is possible, but we must be careful. If he is close to the Blackwater Gang, we do not want to alert them to his presence or ours." They continued more slowly, Joseph frequently dismounting to examine the trail. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, he suddenly raised his hand for silence, then motioned Vivian to dismount. "Leave the horses here," he whispered. "We go on foot." They secured the animals to a juniper tree and proceeded cautiously through a narrow draw that opened into a small valley. Joseph pointed to a ridge overlooking the valley floor. "There," he murmured, "a man watching the camp below." Squinting against the fading light, Vivian could just make out a figure lying prone on the ridge, a rifle beside him. Even at this distance, she recognized the set of Samuel's shoulders, the way he held himself. "How do we reach him without being seen by the gang?" she asked. Joseph studied the terrain. "We circle around, stay in the shadows of the rocks. It will take time, but we can approach from behind him." It took nearly an hour of careful movement, staying low and using the landscape for cover, before they were close enough to risk calling out to Samuel. Joseph held Vivian back, signaling that he would make the approach. "He is focused on his targets," Joseph explained in a whisper. "If you startle him, he might react without thinking." Joseph moved forward with remarkable stealth, making barely a sound as he approached Samuel from behind. Vivian watched anxiously as Joseph came within a few feet of Samuel, then made a soft sound just enough to alert him to another presence without startling him. Samuel's reaction was instantaneous, but controlled. He rolled to the side, drawing a pistol from his holster and bringing it to bear on Joseph in one fluid motion. When he recognized the scout, confusion replaced alertness in his expression. Then his gaze shifted past Joseph to where Vivian stood partially concealed by a boulder. For a moment, Samuel remained frozen, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he carefully lowered his weapon and motioned them both to stay low as they joined him at his vantage point. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he whispered to Vivian, his voice a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear not for himself, but for her. "Sheriff Collins told me you were tracking the Blackwater Gang," Vivian replied, keeping her voice equally low. "I couldn't let you face them alone." Samuel's expression hardened. "So you decided to put yourself in danger instead, after everything you've already been through?" "I had to warn you," Vivian insisted. "The gang attacked a stagecoach near Silver City. They killed 2 passengers. They're even more dangerous than before." Samuel's gaze moved from Vivian to Joseph, who nodded confirmation. "It's true. The territorial governor has posted an additional reward for their capture. The army is also hunting them now." Samuel absorbed this information with a grim nod. "Then my timing is fortunate. They're camped in the valley below, 5 of them just as you described." He looked back at Vivian. "I've been watching them for 2 days, waiting for the right moment." "The right moment for what?" Vivian asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Samuel's eyes were cold as he replied, "To end their reign of terror." Joseph moved forward to peer over the ridge. "You plan to take on all 5 alone?" "I've faced worse odds," Samuel said simply. Vivian reached out to touch his arm. "Sam, please, let the army handle this. Or at least wait for Sheriff Collins and his posse." Samuel looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something in his expression softened. "Vivian, I appreciate your concern, but this is something I need to do." "Why?" she pressed. "Why you?" Samuel was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Because I know what men like Cordell Blackwater do to people who can't defend themselves. During the war, I saw towns destroyed, families torn apart. After the fighting ended, I thought I could leave those memories behind." His gaze returned to the camp below. "But when I found you chained to that wagon wheel left to die, He shook his head. Some things a man can't walk away from. I understand, Vivian said softly, but I don't want your death on my conscience. Joseph, who had been studying the camp below, turned back to them. Night is coming. They have posted only one guard. The others drink whiskey around their fire. Samuel nodded. They've grown careless. They don't believe anyone is following them this far into the mountains. A single man attacking 5 is still poor odds, Joseph observed, but 3 attackers from different directions when they are unprepared. Samuel looked at him sharply. I won't involve either of you in this. I am already involved, Joseph replied calmly. And the woman has more reason than most to see justice done. Absolutely not, Samuel said firmly, his gaze returning to Vivian. I won't put you in that kind of danger again. I'm not asking to fight, Vivian clarified, but I can help create a diversion. Something to draw their attention while you and Joseph approach. Samuel opened his mouth to object, but Joseph spoke first. She has courage, this woman of yours, and she is right, a diversion would improve our chances. She's not Samuel began, then stopped, looking uncomfortable. It's too risky. Everything about this situation is risky, Vivian pointed out, but together we have a better chance than you would alone. Samuel looked between them, clearly torn between his desire to protect Vivian and the logic of their argument. Finally, he sighed in resignation. We'll need a solid plan, and Vivian stays at a safe distance. As darkness fell completely, they refined their strategy. Joseph would circle around to approach the camp from the east. Samuel would position himself to the south, where the terrain offered the best cover. Vivian, against Samuel's continued objections, would create a diversion from the western ridge far enough away to be safe, but visible enough to draw attention. Wait for my signal, Samuel instructed as they prepared to move into position. 3 shots in quick succession. That's when you light the fire, Vivian, not before. She nodded, clutching the bundle of resinous pine branches they had prepared. I understand. Before they separated, Samuel caught her arm. If anything goes wrong, if you hear prolonged shooting, or if anyone approaches your position, you ride out immediately. Joseph's horse knows the way back to Pine Creek. I'm not leaving without you, Vivian insisted. Samuel's expression grew stern. Promise me, Vivian. I can't focus on what needs to be done if I'm worried about you. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. I promise to stay safe. That's not what I asked. It's the best promise I can give, she replied steadily. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, frustration mingled with reluctant admiration. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Vivian made her way carefully to her assigned position. The bundle of branches and a small tin of matches secured in a saddlebag slung over her shoulder. The western ridge offered a clear view of the outlaws' camp, where 4 men sat around a fire passing a bottle, while a 5th stood guard at the edge of the camp. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited for Samuel's signal. The night air grew colder, and Vivian pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She couldn't see either Samuel or Joseph now. They had vanished into the darkness to take up their positions. Just as she began to wonder if something had gone wrong, 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. Immediately, Vivian set to work, arranging the branches into a pile and striking a match. The resinous pine caught quickly, flames leaping upward in a bright flare that would be visible from the camp below. The reaction was immediate. Shouts erupted from the camp as the outlaws scrambled for their weapons, confused by the sudden appearance of fire on the ridge. The guard turned toward the distraction exactly as planned. In that moment of confusion, more gunfire erupted from the south and east. Vivian could see 2 of the outlaws fall immediately. The remaining 3 took cover behind rocks and wagons, returning fire in both directions. From her position, Vivian could see more than either Samuel or Joseph. One of the outlaws, a tall man with a distinctive scar that could only be Cordell Blackwater himself, was working his way around a rock formation, clearly intending to flank Samuel's position. Without thinking, Vivian grabbed a burning branch from her fire and waved it wildly, shouting to draw the outlaw's attention away from Samuel. It worked too well. Blackwater spun toward her, raising his rifle. A shot rang out, and for a terrifying moment, Vivian thought she'd been hit. But it was Blackwater who staggered, clutching his shoulder. Samuel had used her diversion to change his own position, and now stood with his pistol trained on the outlaw leader. "Drop your weapon, Blackwater," Samuel called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. For a tense moment, it seemed the outlaw might still try to fight. Then, with a curse, he let his rifle fall to the ground. The remaining two gang members, seeing their leader captured and two of their companions down, quickly surrendered to Joseph. When it was over, Samuel secured the prisoners while Joseph tended to one of the wounded outlaws. The other had been killed instantly. Vivian made her way down to the camp, her heart still racing from the encounter. Samuel looked up as she approached, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering anger. "You promised to stay safe," he said, the tension evident in his voice. "I did stay safe," Vivian replied, "and I may have saved your life." Before Samuel could respond, Joseph joined them. "The wounded man will live to face justice. We should move quickly. There is a garrison at Fort Webster 2 days' ride from here." Samuel nodded, his gaze still fixed on Vivian. "We'll head out at first light. The 3 who can ride will be tied to their horses. The wounded one can use the wagon." That night, they took turns standing guard over the prisoners. When it was Vivian's turn to rest, she found it impossible to sleep. The events of the day, the confrontation, the danger, the relief of seeing Samuel alive had left her too agitated for rest. She found Samuel sitting alone by the fire, his expression distant as he cleaned his revolver with practiced movements. "You should be resting," he said without looking up. "So should you," Vivian countered, sitting beside him. Samuel set the weapon aside with a sigh. "Vivian, what you did today was incredibly foolish and incredibly brave." "I learned something about bravery from a man who cut a stranger free from a wagon wheel," she replied softly. A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "That was different." "Was it?" Vivian challenged. "You risked your life for me then. Why shouldn't I do the same for you?" Samuel finally looked at her directly. "Because your life is worth more than mine." "That's not true," Vivian said firmly, "and it's not your decision to make." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "What happened to your fiance?" Samuel asked suddenly. "Does he know you're here?" Vivian shook her head. "Lawrence and I have ended our engagement. It was mutual." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, surprise, followed by a quickly suppressed hope. "I see. And what will you do now?" "That depends," Vivian replied, gathering her courage, "on what happens next." "Next?" "After we deliver the Blackwater Gang to justice. After this journey is over." Samuel stared into the fire. "I have a ranch to return to, cattle to tend." "Is that all?" Vivian asked softly. His gaze returned to her face, studying it in the firelight. "What are you asking, Vivian?" "I'm asking if there might be a place for me in that future," she said, her heart pounding. "Not as someone who needs rescuing, but as someone who chooses to be there." Samuel's expression softened. "It's a hard life, nothing like what you're accustomed to in St. Louis." "I don't want the life I had in St. Louis," Vivian said firmly. "I want a life where I'm free to make my own choices, to be useful to." She hesitated, then finished in a near whisper, "To be with someone who sees me as I truly am." Samuel reached across the space between them, his calloused hand gently covering hers. "And is that how you see me?" "As someone who truly knows you. You knew me from the moment you cut me free," Vivian replied. "You saw my strength even when I was at my weakest." Samuel's fingers tightened around hers. "I never expected to find someone like you in this life, Vivian Grayson." "Nor I you, Samuel Irwin." For a long moment they sat in silence, hands joined across the divide of the fire. Then Samuel spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "When this is over, when justice has been served, would you consider coming back to the ranch with me? Not as a visitor, but to stay?" Vivian's heart soared at the question. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I would." The journey to Fort Webster took 3 days rather than 2, slowed by the need to transport the wounded outlaw and guard the prisoners. When they finally arrived, the garrison commander was astonished by the small party and their captives. "The Blackwater Gang," he marveled, examining the bound men. "Half the territory's been hunting these murderers for months, and you 3 brought them in." "They'll stand trial for multiple murders and robberies," Samuel explained, "including the attack on Miss Grayson and the killing of her uncle near Santa Fe." The commander assured them that the outlaws would be held securely until the territorial marshal arrived to transport them to Santa Fe for trial. He insisted that Samuel, Vivian, and Joseph remain at the fort for a few days to rest and provide their statements for the official record. Word of their capture of the notorious gang spread quickly. By the time Sheriff Collins arrived from Silver City 4 days later, the story had already become legend in the territory. "You've done what a dozen posses couldn't," Collins told Samuel, shaking his hand vigorously. "The governor himself has authorized payment of the reward." Samuel looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Joseph and Miss Grayson deserve equal credit. I couldn't have done it alone." Collins turned to Vivian with newfound respect. "Quite a change from the young lady I found half dead in the desert. You've got sand, Miss Grayson." The reward money was substantial enough to make a significant difference to a small ranching operation struggling against the vagaries of weather and cattle prices. When Samuel tried to give Vivian her share, she refused. "Consider it my investment," she said with a smile, "in our future." 2 weeks after capturing the Blackwater Gang, they stood together on the porch of Samuel's ranch house, a modest cabin nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it, an open range spreading before it. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small garden beside the house showed signs of recent attention. "It's not much," Samuel said, watching her reaction anxiously. "Nothing like what you're used to." Vivian turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's perfect. It's freedom." Samuel took her hands in his. "Vivian, before we go any further, there's something I need to ask you, something proper." She smiled, already knowing what was coming. "I'm not a wealthy man," Samuel continued. "I can't offer you fine dresses or fancy parties. But I can promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you for as long as I live." He paused, swallowing hard. "Vivian Grayson, will you marry me?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married a month later in the small church in Cottonwood Springs. Martha Wells helped Vivian prepare a simple white dress, and Joseph served as Samuel's best man. Sheriff Collins gave the bride away, and the entire town turned out to celebrate the union of the quiet rancher and the Eastern lady who had captured his heart. As they exchanged vows, Vivian wore the wooden pendant Samuel had carved for her during her recovery, a symbol of how their story had begun, with an act of courage and compassion that had broken the chains binding her to a life she hadn't chosen. That night, as they stood together on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Samuel wrapped his arms around his wife. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Vivian leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Happier than I ever imagined possible. No regrets about leaving your old life behind. She turned in his arms to face him. The only chains that ever truly bound me were the ones I accepted in my mind, the belief that I had to live the life others chose for me. She reached up to touch his face. You didn't just cut me free from that wagon wheel, Samuel. You showed me I could be free in every way that matters. Samuel leaned down to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and passion, and the certainty that they had found in each other something rare and precious, a love born in the harshest circumstances that had emerged stronger for the trials it had endured. As the years passed, the small ranch prospered. Samuel and Vivian worked side by side, facing droughts and harsh winters, celebrating good years and enduring bad ones. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, first a son they named Henry after Vivian's uncle, then a daughter called Elizabeth. Cordell Blackwater and his surviving gang members were tried and hanged in Santa Fe, bringing final closure to the ordeal that had brought Samuel and Vivian together. Joseph visited occasionally, becoming a beloved uncle figure to their children and a valued friend to them both. Sometimes, visitors who heard the story of how they met expressed amazement that such a terrible experience could lead to happiness. At those times, Samuel would look at Vivian with a quiet smile, and she would touch the wooden pendant she still wore. Life gives us moments of choice, she would say. When Samuel found me chained to that wagon wheel, he chose courage and compassion. Everything good in our lives flowed from that single decision. And Samuel would add, his voice soft with reverence, and when Vivian chose to trust a stranger who cut her bonds, she showed a courage far greater than mine. Together, they had built a life that neither could have imagined alone, a life defined not by the constraints of society or circumstance, but by the freedom that comes from choosing one's own path and walking it hand in hand with someone who sees your true worth. In the wild territory that was slowly transforming into a more settled land, their story became a cherished tale, how a woman chained to a wagon wheel and the cowboy who saved her found in each other not just rescue, but redemption and a love that would last a lifetime.